The latest, with 5 Americans being freed from Iran in a prisoner swap. Fox News' Rebecca Castor with the latest.
5 Americans who have been held captive in Iran boarding a plane to make their way back to the U.S. The U.S. government says they were all wrongfully detained.
Big day, big development, and we're obviously all very, very happy.
In exchange, the Biden administration will release 5 Iranian prisoners, 2 of which will remain on U.S. soil. A deal that also includes releasing billions in Iranian funds that were frozen due to sanctions.
Today, the equivalent of $5.9 billion was deposited to the accounts of the 6 Iranian banks.
Critics say the administration is not only boosting the Iranian economy, but also making Americans more vulnerable.
This is the beginning of the next round of hostages.
The incentive system is now put in place, not just for the Iranians, but for the North Koreans, for every bad actor that says, take an American, you'll get $1 billion.
Washington maintains the unfrozen funds are not ransom, and Iran will only be able to use the money for humanitarian purposes, but that remains to be seen.
They're not building hospitals or schools or helping their people. It's heartbreaking. They'll use the money for malign purposes.
A senior administration official says the freed Americans will be reunited with their families and receive recovery assistance. The planned swap coming as world leaders meet at the UN General Assembly in New York. In Washington, Rebecca Castor, Fox News.
I always appreciate that update, Rebecca, and we are going to continue on this subject here, a big news story here. We want to continue our conversation. Let's bring in our next guest here on Live Now from Fox. This is Robert Sanders, Senior Lecturer of National Security from the University of New Haven. Thank you so much for being here on Live Now.
Glad to be with you.
All right, so a big day here for the U.S. State Department, as well as really these Americans that are going to be involved here in this prisoner swap here. Still a lot to get to, and controversial at best here with the $6 billion that is also included here in this swap.
Well, controversy on one hand and jubilation on the other. Americans wrongly detained in an adversary nation are now free and on their way home to their families and loved ones. That's a great day. How do we do that? Well, we did that with the assistance of some of our great friends in the Middle East, Qatar and Oman in particular. The Swiss played a great role. The South Koreans played a great role. And that was because this administration was able to engage in the international community and move this ball forward over a 2-year period. Now, let's also be clear. The money that we're talking about here that is going to be handed over not directly to the Iranians, but to the Qataris, and the nation of Qatar and its banks will administer release of this money for humanitarian subject. That money was originally moved by the Trump administration. So let's be clear about how the money moved around.
All right, very good. Point that out there as well, Robert. What do you say though when it comes to the thinking? And we heard that in the previous news package there, that adversaries around the world see this and they see that what could be done if you capture Americans, that if they hold out long enough, that funds could be available to them. What do you make of that?
This is not a new news story. Americans have been taken prisoner all around the world for various reasons. These Americans were taken prisoner because we don't have diplomatic relations with Iran, and Iran is playing a card. Any nation in the world can play that card. Russia played that card and still playing it with Americans that they hold who are at the United States Department of State has said are held illegally. There are other Americans in other countries around the world being held. Some of those countries are actually what we would consider to be Western countries. Most are not, but some are. And that illegal detainment is not always a trade-off for money and funds. Sometimes it's a trade-off for the ability to have the United States in other ways.
That's good to know.
It's largely about economics as well.
Right. And if you can explain to us, I'm sure that it's such a complex negotiations that happen. Can you explain a little bit just how often these negotiations are trying to be taking place when an American is captured overseas and they are trying for the release, or if it's an unjust imprisonment there? Just how much really is it on a daily, weekly basis that the State Department tries to bring these Americans home?
Well, if we have relations with that country, the U.S. ambassador to that country is engaged, and staff members of the U.S. Embassy are engaged on a daily, weekly basis to try to make sure that those Americans that are held, even some who are held in prison for crimes that they have actually committed, unlike these five, will be visited by the United States and make sure that they are well cared for. In countries like Iran, we can visit them if the Iranians allow us, if they follow international law, but we know that they're not well cared for because we just know about the prison in which they were confined to. Now, the ambassador works for the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is a member of the cabinet, works for the president. So the marching orders that come down from the president to the secretary to the ambassador are to take care of Americans anywhere they are in the world. If Americans are taken hostage, in this case, or confined lawfully for a crime, the ambassador is supposed to engage to do the best they can for those Americans in this sense. Now, in this particular case, the United States doesn't have relations with Iran. So we had to rely on Switzerland, who is our representative in Iran, and our friends in Qatar and our friends in Oman, who are a Middle Eastern country. And they want to do the best they can to try to make that not happen because they're in a precarious position should a fight like that begin. And so their activities on our behalf, along with the South Koreans for managing the money, the Germans, the Irish, who also had the money, has been pivotal in our ability to move this process along and get these Americans freed.
Yeah, so true there. And lastly, Robert, I'd just like to know, too, about what happens once the Americans are back on American soil there. What type of debriefing happens with the intel agencies with them? How does that all work? Because you just don't get off the plane and you're back in America. How does that all work? And what about psychological issues as well?
So when they first got on those planes, and it was a Qatar government plane that flew them from Iran, from Tehran into Doha, they were met with U.S. medical personnel, some of whom I'm sure were psychological personnel, as well as members of the State Department, and the ability to talk to their family members, handed the United States government phones so they can make phone calls and talk to their children and wives and other loved ones. And when they land, they will be given the option to join a program called PISA. And it's basically a prisoner assistance program for people like them who've been isolated in a foreign country and are unable to engage in the normal lifestyle that they would have had if they had been in the United States, and have been subject to psychological terror and maybe even physical torture by their captors. They can voluntarily join that program, and that program will help them walk through the reintegration into the United States, engagement with their family, and to put some of the terror that they've experienced behind them.
That is all good to know there in such a complex situation, but we appreciate your insight and analysis here of this really big event. Robert Sanders, thank you so much for being here on Live Now from Fox and giving us some great intel and analysis.
Glad to be with you. Take care, and welcome home to those individuals, and hopefully soon to many more.
Yes, that is so true and so well said. Thanks so much, Robert. You take care, and we are going to take another 2-minute break.